All right, so today we're going to go ahead and take a look at another huge name in the D&D universe of YouTube, um, D&D Shorts. Now, despite the name, he has plenty of long-form videos, and every single one of them is fantastic. I'm a huge fan. Um, at the time of recording, he's got 504,000 subscribers, so huge, huge. So if you somehow don't know who this is, definitely go give the channel a watch. Give them a subscribe. He's fantastic. Um, but we're going to go ahead and go over his video on. I've only watched the first like 5 minutes of this because I wanted it to be as new to me as it is to you. But I believe it's magic items crafting. That's what he opens up with. So let's go ahead and jump into it and see what's going on.
So the new DMG has crafting in it. Some people like it, some people hate it, and I think it's fascinating. Fascinating as a case study in the most busted ass stuff you could possibly do in Dungeons and Dragons, but also as a piece of game design. So to craft a magic item, you have to have proficiency in the Arcana skill. You also have to have proficiency with a tool, and the type of tool you need is related to the type of magic item you're trying to craft, as shown in this handy table. As you can see, Woodcarver's proficiency is probably optimal. This is why Jesus was OP. You then need to spend time and gold to make the thing you want. The time taken is given in days.
Now, I just want everybody to take a close look at this chart, because I've heard a lot of people complaining about how crafting's super broken because you can make legendary items. One, you have to get 100,000 gold. Well, that's not overly difficult to do. It's not easy. But then look at the required time, 250 days. Now, yeah, you can split that up if you have, your allies help you, but, I mean, it's still going to be long. And if your DM is anything like me, your BBG is going to get stronger the longer it takes for you to get to them. Maybe you're on a time limit. So 250 days is not at all feasible. So it's one of those things where that was put there as like, yeah, you can, but you're probably not going to. Same with very rare, 125 days. 20,000 gold is a fair amount of gold, but I guess if everybody's pulling together, it's easy to get to. Common and uncommon is going to be super easy. 5 days, split that up, it's nothing. Uncommon 10 days, once again split that up, it's nothing. The gold requirement's not massive, but once you hit rare, very rare, legendary, though, that's a fair amount of time. It really is. And I guarantee you your DM's not going to let you just have 50 days go by like that. Maybe they'll let you do it between sessions. I can see that happening for for common or uncommon, sure. Maybe for rare, that's kind of a stretch, but maybe. But for very rare, unless the entire party has proficiency in the same tool and they're all working on this one item for one person, sorry, but 150 days is not happening between sessions. Especially since most times from one session to another session is a night. A day, a couple days for travel, which if you're traveling, you can't be working on a magic item. So anyone who's saying that crafting is broken, I'm going to have to heavily disagree with just based on that required time. Never mind the gold requirement or the materials.
And 1 day equates to 8 hours work. So you could do 2 days worth of work in one 16-hour shift. People can also help you craft, and if they do, you divide the time it takes to craft an item by the number of helpers. But every helper needs to have the Arcana proficiency and the correct tool proficiency as well. So if you wanted a broom of flying, for example, you could grab a friend and it would take you 40 hours work each and 200 gold to make one. In a real grind, 2 elves can pull that off in 48 hours. Thanks to their 4-hour long rest.
Yeah. See, like I said, you can do that between sessions because it's 40 hours. You get 2 elves working on the one item. But, I mean, realistically, the chances of that happening is, it's never zero. But, maybe people will be taking a lot more of the woodworkers' proficiency just because magic item crafting. But I doubt it. I I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Consumable items like potions take half as long to craft and cost half as much, and if a magic item casts a spell, like the Wand of Magic Missiles, you need to be able to cast that spell to craft that item. Finally, you need some raw materials, which is up to your GM, but everything's up to your GM, so that's kind of a moot point. The DMG does, however, give a guide that in any given city, there is a 75% chance that the materials you need are there. If they aren't, you can try crafting something else that week, or travel to another city and check there, or just wait 7 days. After a week, you can repeat that 75% check. And that's it. That's everything you need to craft. And if that sounds suspiciously easy, it's because it is. There's a lot to talk about, but let's start with the insane, game-breaking power in your hands right now. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the patented D&D Shorts top 10 insanely busted combos you can do with crafting. For the purpose of this, let's imagine we're Wizards of the Coast approved customers, and we're following the PHB exactly. At level 5, a player has on average 637 gold.
I want to know where he pulled that statistic from, because almost none of my players have 600 gold by level 5, and trust me, it's not for lack of me trying. I give them money just for walking down the goddamn street. There's money, right? Your first 5 levels, you're spending money on gear, on potions, on magic scrolls. You're spending your money in those first 5 levels. The only player I've ever had that had 600 gold was the barbarian that spent their money on nothing, because all they needed was the axe in their hand, a couple of potions, maybe. Their rage protected them for the most part, so they weren't spending their gold on anything. And even then, they were just barely at 600. They were like 610, 615, somewhere around there. So I don't know where he got that statistic. I'm assuming he got it from WotC. I have no idea where WotC's getting that statistic, because unless you're giving your players out like 1,000 gold every session, there's no way they have 637 or whatever number he just gave. There's no way. Not in the first 5 levels. They're spending their money on shit. Between 5 and 10, they're saving because they don't have anything else to buy. They're at that sweet spot where they no longer need healing potions. They're at a high enough level that they've gotten enough spell slots that they don't really need scrolls anymore. They've got their gear for the most part. Anything that they're going to get is going to be loot, not something that they're buying, But between 1 and 5, I don't know where that statistic came from, but in my experience, how old am I now? 32. So in my 14 years of experience, I've seen that with one player only, and it was with one campaign. That number is ludicrous.
Plus a common and an uncommon item.
Let's
talk about the possibilities. We've already mentioned the Broom of Flying, but actually think about this. Every player can drop 200 gold and boom, everyone has a 50-foot fly speed. Some of you might remember the original Aarakocra, and how for years people argued that it was the most busted species in the game. It was constantly banned from tables. That's because it had a 50-foot fly speed. Now anyone can have that, and they can do it in heavy armor. By the way, I am showing the old version of these magic items, but they're basically the same. The Broom of Flying takes a magic action to activate now, but it lasts all day. That fly speed is always on. But what if 50-foot fly speed isn't enough, and you want to cosplay the full-on classic witch? Well, you just toss on a Cloak of Protection. Thanks for the +1 AC and +1 to every saving throw for every member in the party. But that's all a bit defensive. What if you want to make people explode? Well, 200 gold can grab any spellcaster a +1 spellcasting focus. Each class has their own specific type, and they are all insane. The uncommon Rod of the Pact Keeper gives a warlock +1 to all spell attack rolls and all spell save DCs, and once per long rest, you can just regain a spell slot for free. The uncommon Bloodwell Vial gives a sorcerer a +1 to the DC of every spell, #Fireball, and every spell attack roll, #Firebolt.
Alright, I will concede. Giving everyone a, flying broom can be a little broken, can be a little wishy-washy. But you also have to think about the fact that it's really easy to knock somebody off of a broom. It's not the same as an Aarakocra, like he compared it to. Aarakocras can just fly. They've got wings. You hit an Aarakocra with a heavy blunt weapon. you're not gonna be like, oh well, now you have to roll a save to make sure you keep your grip on that broom. And I know not every DM does that, but it's a very viable thing. It's something that would make sense. So if you don't want your players to all have flying brooms, you just put a big, heavy, hulking monster that can fly at them and have them knock them off their broom. Is it going to irritate them? Sure, but it's something that would make sense. It's something that you can do without breaking any kind of continuity. So it's not as broken as every party member being an Aarakocra. The cloak is, whatever. It's cool. It is cool for the first 5 levels, sure. And yeah, you can get one just like the flying broom. You can get one for every single party member, but that's going to require 5 days for each item. The average party has 5 people, so that's 25 days. It's going to take some time. And then for the cloak, that's another 25 days for a total of 50 days. And the cloak has a different weapon or tool proficiency requirement than the flying broom. So you're not even looking at the chance of every party member being able to help on each individual item. So you're still looking at probably about 15, 20 days of sitting on your ass doing nothing, or continuing the adventure. So only certain party members have these items for a while, right? And then the spell focuses, yeah, that is pretty broken for the first 5 levels. +1 is great for those first 5 levels. After level 6, though, +1 is kind of whoop-de-fucking-do, right? Still good, still cool, still makes it, easier to hit, makes it easier for the enemy to fail their saves. But in the grand scheme of things, +1 after level 6 is not a big deal.
It also says, once per long rest, when you roll hit dice, you regain 5 sorcery points.
Yeah,
the
the Blood Roll
Jarl
Bell is
fix
broken.
lets you do
I've got
that
nothing on
as
that
a
one.
bonus action. 5 additional sorcery points as a bonus action every day, while also buffing every spell you cast.
Alright, sorry, that jump cut was to cut out his ad because I don't have ads. I'm not advertised. I don't have enough subscribers for it yet, and I doubt the company in question that he partnered with would have me advertise. So I cut out his ad. That's what that jump cut was. Apologize.
It's not only spellcasters who can get in on the fun. Maybe an Eldritch Claw tattoo is what you'd like to craft. This tattoo adds +1 to every attack and damage roll of your unarmed strikes, and as a bonus action, you can empower yourself to gain further benefits. It lasts for 1 minute, the reach of your unarmed strikes increases by 15 feet, and every hit deals an extra 1d6.
Okay, so now we're just kind of reaching, because while that is pretty broken, pretty cool for an uncommon, something that you can have like that. The monk, which is primarily the class that does the most unarmed strikes, is, if I remember correctly, the second least played class. Not a whole lot of people want to play monks. They're, in my opinion, boring. According to statistics, most people agree with me. You're in a fantasy world. You don't want to cast spells, attack with swords, not punch things. So this particular item, while it does have other things, is fairly worthless in the grand scheme of things. Unless for some reason you decide you just want to be an unarmed fighter without being a monk, but we don't see a whole lot of those. So while it's not completely useless, it's not going to see as much use as one might think or hope, with how cool it sounds. So now we're just kind of reaching, but I'm sure there's better examples.
Force damage. Did someone say level 5 monk hitting for an extra 4d6
he
plus
called it
4
monk.
every turn while staying out of melee range with melee attacks? Because that's what I heard. And that's before we get to the other.
Yeah, that's what I heard too, but unfortunately I also know, the grand scheme of things, which is there are no monks on the field. If I remember the statistic correctly, it's like 1 in every 600 players plays a monk. The percentage of overall players was less than 5%. Maybe that's changed. I haven't checked it in a few months, so maybe it's changed. doubt it. But hey, I also am biased against the monk, so maybe.
Other tattoos. Spell-wrought tattoos are consumable magic items that let anyone cast a stored spell. You can craft an uncommon one that will let any creature cast a spell of up to 3rd level for only 100 gold pieces. You can store encounter-breaking spells.
Okay, so I didn't fully read that, obviously, but he said consumable. I'm sorry, if you're spending 5 days to make a consumable item, because remember, time and cost is only halved for potions. So if you're spending 5 days on a consumable, we're gonna have issues. We're gonna have issues. That's how that's gonna play out. You and I are gonna have issues. There's so much better things you could be making, so much more useful things than you could be making that aren't consumable. So, I don't know.
Spells like Hypnotic Pattern or just good old Fireball, and then give that to your familiar. That's an additional spell in combat that you don't have to use a spell slot or an action to cast, and you can do this multiple times. Hell, you can craft spell-wrought tattoos containing the spell Find Familiar and give them to the entire party, so everyone gets a familiar who can then cast spells. Give each of those familiars a spell-wrought tattoo with Fireball, and you can toss out 4 fireballs the moment combat starts. Round 1, 32d6 damage. Yes, it costs 400 gold to do,
that wouldn't work
but
out
yes,
the way he's saying it
it's worth
would.
it
I'm
to
telling
see a
you right now,
mouse
it wouldn't.
stand on its hind legs and commit terrorism. And familiars can do other stuff too. What about the Wand of Magic Missiles? Anyone can learn Magic Missile through the Magic Initiate Origin feat, so
Sure.
anybody can craft these wands. Then you give it to the Warlock's familiar.
So now we're really going in the realm of make believe here. Yeah, anyone can learn the Magic Missile with the Magic Initiate feat. I personally find it very hard to believe that people are going to take the Magic Initiate feat just to learn Magic Missile, just to make wands of Magic Missile. It's just not that good. And on top of that, depending on your background, the earliest you'd get the Magic Initiate feat would be level 4. And there are, depending on your class and what you're trying to do with your class, so much better feats for you to take, instead of something that'll just help you make an okay item that after, level 6 or 7, it isn't even okay. It's just kind of bad. Not bad per se, but, I'm going to go with bad, actually. So, will there be people that do that? Sure. But it's like, why? Magic Missile is cool. But if you're not getting it until level 4, and there's something else that would work better for your character, like, if you're a paladin, why would you take the Magic Initiate just to learn Magic Missile at level 4? Just doesn't make sense to me,
And let them blast away in combat. Sure, the new rules say you can only expend 3 charges at a time, but that is still 5d4 plus 5 unavoidable damage every turn in combat. This essentially turns your familiars into roaming machine guns. Or if you're looking for a more controlling option, why not grab the ever-smoking bottle, which can plunge an entire encounter into heavy obscurement. This lets any prepared party who've taken the Skulker feat or have blind fighting or tremor sense to completely body any encounter that doesn't specifically have blind sight. Yes, this uncommon item even blocks true sight. And we still haven't mentioned Enspell.
That is probably one of the best items, just solely for the fact that it blocks all sights, with except for blind sight and tremor sense. But the chances of your teammates having those so that you continue the fight is very slim. But that really is essentially a get out of jail free card, right? If you step into a fight that you can't handle, that you should have avoided, and you've got one of those, you just got out of that fight, my friend. They're not going to chase you. They can't see you. Trying to steal from a building and you get caught, well, you just drop one of those bad boys and out the door you go, right? They are irritatingly broken. And now you can craft them.
Spelled weapons. You can infuse a spell from the Conjuration, Divination, Evocation, Necromancy, or Transmutation school into a weapon for your allies.
Sure.
Crafting an enspelled weapon with a cantrip or a first level spell counts as only an uncommon craft. And when you do this, unlike with tattoos, which are single use, that weapon gets 6 charges and regains 1d6 charges each dawn. You can cast the spell within by just expending 1 charge. The exact same applies to enspelled armor, except armor can store spells from the illusion and abjuration schools. Every fighter, ranger, and paladin now gets the shield spell for free multiple times per day. I mean, what is the worst that could happen when a warforged fighter with heavy armor and a shield and the defensive fighting style and a cloak of protection and enspelled armor can rock an on-demand 28 AC from level 5? They can be trusted with that, right?
Sure.
And finally, what if you just want to completely break the core?
Okay, I do have to completely agree. Enspelled armor and weapons, incredibly broken. There's no two ways about that. Is it still going to be heavily encouraged in my games? Absolutely, it will. It's fun. It's cool. And you still have to know those spells in order to make that stuff. So hopefully you've got a wizard that knows shield. I've seen a lot of wizards that don't even bother with shield because, I want to fight. I don't get fireball for several levels, so I need all my attack spells that I can get. So, enspelled weapons and armor are fairly broken. Absolutely agree. Have fun with that.
Fundamental balance of the game. You know, stats? Those things you need to play, strength, dexterity. Well, what if they didn't matter? What if you dropped all your stats into charisma and constitution as a paladin?
Hey, don't you dare lure me in with a good time. I love the charisma stat. It is my favorite stat because I love playing bards. Sing and talk my way out of any situation. Talk.
Kind of forgetting that you need strength to hit hard. Well, don't worry about it. Just drop 200 gold on the Gauntlets of Ogre Power and set your strength score to 19. Every player can start the game with 100 gold now, so if just one other player is willing to loan you their startup, you can do this at level 1. That works out as an approximate plus 11 to your strength score across the entire game for just 200 gold. I don't need to tell you how crazy it is to be able to completely dump a stat, invest all those ability score points elsewhere, and then come in with 19 strength anyway. And let's be clear, these are just some basic ideas. We could go on for hours here. We haven't even talked about potions or spell scrolls or items that are rare and above. All of those combos use uncommon items or lower. Also remember that these aren't mutually exclusive. They're not a big investment. It's not like a powerful combo that requires multiple feats and a specific subclass that really limits your playstyle. Players can do 3 or 4 of these things by just level 5, no matter their species or ability scores or even their class. And yes, that is all very funny, but let's be serious for a second and talk about game design, because, to put it plainly, these rules aren't good. Yes, they're overpowered, but mechanics-wise, they're bad for 3 reasons. Number 1 is the most important. When you design anything for a game, the first question you need to ask is what type of behavior does this mechanic encourage? Theoretically, everything you create should inspire a desired behavior in players and GMs. My philosophy in design is to encourage collaboration, engagement, and fun at the game table. But what do these crafting rules inspire? Well, to be honest, they inspire players to not play D&D. What is the optimal strategy when you have 200 gold? The answer is to stay at home and build something. There are no checks, there is no adventuring, there's no contest, you just stop playing the game and get a magic item a few days later. Players used to be encouraged to explore, they were hungry to crawl dungeons for magic items, but now you guarantee them by staying at home. And if you can guarantee a magic item by crafting it, I mean, why not just let people buy it at that point? What's the difference between buying a magic item for 200 gold and crafting one for 200 gold and getting it a couple of days later?
The difference is, if they have to spend 10 days making an item, then 10 days later, when they finally come out of their little hermit holes reeking of piss and bad BO, the city that needed them, about a day's travel away, has now been burned to the ground. They failed their quest or a part of their quest. A huge portion of their reward and chunk of experience is now gone because they decided they wanted to spend 10 days sitting on their asses making an item while they had a job to do, you know? So it entices them to think about their decisions and understand that, decisions, actions have consequences. Any decision has a reaction, Now, you don't have to do it that way. That's how I have always done things. And with this, it's just, yeah, I mean, I don't know. If they buy the item and go, then they've got the item. They can go straight continue their quest, which is why buying the item should always be more than the cost for crafting. And I mean, not just the 200 you need to craft the item. I mean, the cost of materials. So chances are the total cost isn't going to be 200 gold. It's going to be somewhere around 230 to 260, depending on, depending. So if you want to let them buy it, it should be 350, something significantly higher. But if they want to spend 10 days, then they run the risk of missing out on, a huge quest or a huge chunk of experience. So that's why I wouldn't recommend crafting, but everyone's going to do what they want to do.
Sure, it might take 5 days downtime, but people just fast forward through that anyway. Sure, a GM can make up reasons why players can't take time off, they can put a ticking clock on the adventure, but should a GM have to do that across an entire campaign? Never allow for a second there to be a moment that players can take 5 days off, because if they do, the game will break? No, GMs shouldn't have to fight the mechanics of the game to get players out of the door. Players should be inspired by the mechanics.
I agree. They shouldn't have to. Some quests should, in my opinion, have a timeline, have a set amount of time you have to get it done by, because, the world doesn't stop just because you want to sit down and make some items for yourself. If the lord of this city tells you, hey, our neighboring city's about to be attacked, there's a warband on its way, it's going to be there in 2 days, we need you to get there. It's going to take you a day to get there. You need to get there and save them. And you decide to spend 5 days making an item. You knew it was going to take that warband 2 days. You knew that their only desired outcome was raising that city. You made the decision to let it burn after saying you'd save it. And, I mean, saying you're going to do something and then choosing not to has negative consequences.
To go out hunting and adventuring. The second problem is simply, yes, the availability and low cost of magic items is simply too powerful. Sure, GMs who are worried about PCs being too strong could just ban every single broken magic item, but that's not reasonable. There are thousands of magic items across this game, and you can find ways to break most of them. You can't just ban all the problematic ones, and you shouldn't have to. It isn't reasonable to charge someone for a book, especially if they're a new GM who is the target audience here, and then say, when they find the rules to be insanely broken, well, it's on you to ban a bunch of stuff that you've never even heard of before. It sounds obvious, but if you're buying a book with a mechanic in it, that mechanic should be balanced. This isn't. Now, as you know, I love being the GM for players with crazy, overpowered builds. I've always found that if you match the energy your players bring to the table, you will have an amazing time no matter the type of player you have. However, even I have to concede that these rules are just bad for the game. Not because they're necessarily too strong, but because they are homogenizing. With the new crafting rules in place, there is no reason that any player shouldn't have a Broom of Flying. 200 gold for 50-foot fly speed forever. It's insane. And that means that every flying species is kind of pointless now. Why play them when you can fly anyway? So are a bunch of...
Oh, I know I said this earlier, but I'm going to say it again. Flying races are not pointless because they're flying themselves. They can't get knocked off of whatever's making them fly. The flying broom isn't as broken as people make it out to be. It's just not. If you're sitting on something and somebody comes up and hits you really hard in the face, you're gonna fall off. It's the same thing with the broom. Flying or not.
of subclass features. Genie Warlock, Sea Druid, Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, Ascendant Dragon Monk, all of these guys get a fly speed as a core feature, but now that feature just doesn't exist, because everyone can fly anyway. There's also no reason that pretty much every build shouldn't have Enspelled Armor with the shield spell in it. Access to the shield spell used to be one of the biggest draws to being an Eldritch Knight fighter, or grabbing it via Magic Initiate as a paladin, but now, why do those things when you can have it anyway? Rogues who could pick up the Booming Blade cantrip were really good before. It was a whole reason to play a half-elf or a kobold, or grab it via Magic Initiate. But now every rogue can cast those spells with an Enspelled weapon. And it goes the other way too. With the power of Enspelled weapons, why would you ever play a Soul Knife rogue? That's an amazing subclass, but it requires you to use your Psychic Blades, and awesome as those are, they're not as good as one dagger that can cast Shield and another dagger that can cast Booming Blade. Same with Cloak of Protection. Bumping every saving throw and your AC by 1 is way better than any feat could ever hope to accomplish, and everyone can do this for just 200 gold. What I really love is being amazed and impressed by my players' creativity and watching them have fun with wacky builds. But if you use these crafting rules as written, every build is going to end up looking pretty much the same unless you're purposefully making yourself bad. These types of rules are what playtesting is for. It's meant to catch this type of stuff, but they were never playtested. I don't know why. I know the designers at Wizards of the Coast are better than this. I don't know why these rules
No,
were
they're
printed as they are. The real problem
because
when you
WotC
dig
likes messing
into
things
it
up.
is tying magic item rarity to its crafting time and price. It simply doesn't work. It will never work because magic items aren't balanced around rarity. Cloak of Protection and Ring of Protection are functionally identical, but one is uncommon and one is rare. Why? I have no idea. There's too many busted low-level magic items and too many garbage high-level magic items for that to be your measure of power. Unless you redesigned every magic item in the game, which they're not allowed to do because it has to be backwards compatible, this system could never work. So am I one of the people who hates the new crafting rules? Actually, no, not at all. I don't mind, because there are free crafting rules out there that are so much better that anyone can use. My favorite are these ones by Loot Tavern. They have rules for harvesting materials from defeated enemies and working those materials into usable magic items. There are actual skill checks involved for you to build your entire character around if you want to optimize them. And most importantly, it encourages players to get out there in the world, hunt down a dragon, defeat it, and craft armor from its scales. It's a gameplay loop as old as time, and it's
like
awesome,
that.
and it's
That's
free.
fun.
This isn't sponsored. I'm sure there are other great crafting systems out there too, but you may as well just take this one because it's free. The new crafting rules are bad. They don't encourage exploration, and you can do completely busted things with them from as early as levels 1 to 5. My recommendation is, if you want a balanced game, don't use these rules. Use one of the other free crafting systems out there instead. But if you want awesome new rules, subclasses, species...
Alright, so I do agree that these crafting rules are kind of bad. They're not as bad as they're made out to be in this video, in my opinion. Yeah, they're pretty bad, and yeah, you can do some pretty busted things, like you said. But I wanna see some of his sessions, because I've never ever had an entire party that was willing to shell out money for each other, do things for each other like crafting. I can't see any of my parties in the future willing to sit down and craft one item of every item they want for the entire party. Like, if the wizard's the only one that has the shield spell, I got some news for you, buddy. He's the only one that's going to have an Enspelled Armor with the shield spell in it, because they're not going to want to make it for other people, and you have to know the spell to put it in, right? Does it happen? I'm sure it happens. I've never seen it happen. But sure, I'm sure it happens. But giving up your money, your time, I don't see it happening. And yeah, you can fast forward through, but another thing is time passes, right? If your party's making a legendary item, it's 250 days, even if miraculously they all have the same tool proficiency and they all have Arcana proficiency, which is not going to happen. But if it does somehow happen, and they all work on it, that's still 50 days. Even if you don't have a timeline on the quest, you know what does have timelines? The seasons. The seasons, right? You started making it in the middle of fall. Well, guess what? Now it's winter. Now you got to somehow traverse the half of the continent through the snow, through a blizzard. You have poor visibility because the blizzard, there's still monsters out there. Now there's snow monsters, monsters that thrive in the cold, that most of which can camouflage in the ice and snow, right? Time is a real thing. It doesn't just disappear because we're playing a fantasy game. So that is the biggest balancing factor of crafting. Is it enough? No. No. I would even argue that some of the high gold cost isn't really enough either. But it's there. It balances to some extent, So I don't know. That's just my opinion on it. Like I said, D&D Shorts, great channel, fantastic information. Obviously, we don't see eye to eye on everything, but I love his videos. Definitely give him a look, give him a subscribe, And if you like this, go ahead and give me a subscribe too, so that I'll know and I can keep doing more, or I can completely change up what I'm doing. But regardless of what you do, thanks for watching.